what are the legitimate limitations which we can place upon people's freedoms? Now, I can already hear the absolutists saying, of course, that there are no legitimate restrictions you can place upon freedom because freedom is absolute. Just to put that really stupid argument to the side, I would ask them, do you or do you not live in a society, and does that not entail some sort of sacrifice of liberty? At the very least, you have to give up the freedom to wantonly rape, pillage, and steal in order to exchange that for the protection that society affords you. So there is, at the very minimum, unless you are a woodsman, in which case you wouldn't be watching this video, so checkmate, there are always some liberties which you give up in order to live in a society. So because we know there are some, I basically want to expand that question now to say, what is the totality of this set of liberties which, when we give them up, we reap some greater benefit than what is lost, either societally or individually? And I have a feeling that this set would be far, far greater than the average American is led to believe. I think there's a disturbing sort of propagandistic push, there has been in America for at least since World War II, about the ideas of freedom and democracy. Now, they're two separate things, but we've basically been led to believe that they're not simply means by which we govern, they are in and of themselves virtues. And I think that's a very, very dangerous propagandistic push, because it gets people to think that these things are always a necessity, when again, they are just means to an end. They're means to, basically in the US, they would be a means to sustain the Constitution. And then, of course, the next question you would ask is, what is the purpose of the Constitution? And the purpose of the Constitution is to sustain the people. And if at any point that mode of government, which is right now a republican democracy, if that no longer sustains the Constitution, which in turn is made to sustain the people, we should have no overzealous attachment to this idea, because it is just a mode by which we want to accomplish a task. And if there might be another more effective means of governance, we should certainly switch to that. So in that light, I want to talk about that. I've been thinking a lot about the political philosophy around dictatorship. This is a subject which has hardly really been touched in the mainstream, even historically, writings about political philosophy. I've been reading pretty much every book I can on the subject, and so far it's led me really only to Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, and Schmitt. And Schmitt is the only one of those that actually dealt with the subject directly in his book, Dictatorship. There are some useful things. Like I said, I'm about halfway through Leviathan, and I've read The Social Contract by Rousseau, both of which are pretty good. But overall, the political, the thinking on the subject has been really, really limited. And as such, I've been working on sort of a longer form, what is probably going to be a sort of feature-length documentary, or only as long as it needs to be, hopefully, but it'll probably end up being somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes, talking about sort of a novel political theory for dictatorship, and talking about where I think the United States is going, and why I think we will see dictatorship in the United States, if not including other Western countries, within the next decade or two. Just given how the political climate is developing, I think the current modes of governance, like I said, just aren't going to be capable of meeting the crises which are coming. And again, I'm going to be talking about that in sort of this feature-length video that I actually put some time into editing and all that. So if that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe. But for this video, I just wanted to get the ball going on, again, that initial question of when can we infringe upon people's liberties, and to sort of dissolve a little bit of this propagandistic zeal with which people, I know, Americans especially, will defend these ideas of liberty and freedom, sort of unthinkingly. We've been taught to love the word, but not understand what it represents. So I want to dissect that a little bit. And this isn't going to be some, silver bullet, slam dunk sort of theory, but I do think it'll get people thinking. I'm going to use an example from etymology to talk about this issue of freedom. And the word, specifically one word, it is deliberate. Now, everyone of course knows what the word deliberate means, but I would be interested to know what you would say if I asked you, what is the opposite of the word deliberate? Now, knowing the word, some of you of course may say, well, deliberate is to think things over by yourself with others and come to a conclusion on something. But if you actually look at how the word is structured, it is, if you didn't know what the word deliberate meant in its common English usage, you would be excused if you said, I think the opposite of deliberate is liberate. And that's kind of weird because that's so removed from how we actually view that word. But indeed, etymologically, that is exactly what it means. The opposite of deliberate, think things through, talk things over, with yourself or with others, and come to a conclusion, is in fact liberate. And the history behind this is fascinating, and I think will get people thinking about the question that I posed at the top of this video. To deliberate, the reason we use that word to mean to come to a conclusion is because before you've thought about a problem and how to solve it, you effectively have, you can imagine it as a branching path with hundreds and hundreds of paths, and your options are effectively limited by only what is actually feasible within reality. And in fact, some of those paths may include what is eventually impossible, but if you haven't considered them, they, to you, are just as possible as anything else before you realize that they are impossible. So it is only then through the act of deliberation, whereby we actually consider each of these paths, consider the facts available at hand, and we decide what may actually be the best path to take. And at that end, the end state of deliberation is that we've eliminated this entire tree of hundreds and hundreds of different options, down to hopefully only one. So as we're at the beginning, we were at liberty to make hundreds and potentially thousands of choices, as many choices as there are possible actions based upon a given problem presented to you. At the end, we are left with only one choice, and effectively we are deliberated. We are no longer free to make any other choices because they would then become illogical. Once we've determined the path that will be the best, that will produce the outcome and is possible, and then produce the outcome that we desire, we are effectively locked into that path. We are deliberated. Now, I just bring up this example to say that, the person who is in the state of liberty, who is in the state of freedom, or potentially, similar to the state of nature, like a Hobbesian state of nature, because we have this overzealous attachment as Americans and Westerners more generally to the word liberty or freedom, we view this as a positive without actually examining the circumstance this person is in. This person is not in, he does not feel any better because he has these limitless whirlwinds of possibilities. In fact, a person is generally going to feel better and feel more secure in their actions if they have a definite set plan, if something is dictated, either by themselves or by somebody else. But to be in a state of a whirlwind of indecision is liberty. That is freedom. Now, some men may be good enough, may be bold enough and smart enough to actually benefit from being in this state. But I would argue that the vast majority of people do not benefit from being in the state of liberty. The state of liberty is a state of confusion and indecision, being presented with too many options that most people simply cannot handle it. And I don't see how, I just don't see how it would be a benefit to most people, Not to mention the societal fracturing that would go on if people are presented with too many options. Every man would be left to, by his own flawed morals, essentially make a choice about potentially rather important things for society, moral questions and things like that. And of course, they would come to different conclusions on things. And this is just another thing that would further break down society. You can imagine you give everybody, for a pertinent example, you can imagine you give everybody the freedom to decide whether or not they abort their fetus. And the fact that people end up making different decisions about this Indeed, thousands of different decisions. It's not a do I kill it or do I not kill it. It's obviously about when they draw the line and things like that. All these different people now have conflicting ideas about a very, very important subject to them, one that is deeply enmeshed in morals and things like that. And I just think that were these people dictated to on this particular issue of abortion, there would be far less social friction. There'd be far less animosity between these people who otherwise, given the freedom to do what they want, decided on these very, very disparate paths. If one dictator were just to come in and say, abortion is illegal, there would be some strife at the beginning, but I cannot help but imagine that things would be, months down the road, once everyone gets used to it, things would be much better. There'd be no animosity between these groups. There'd be no impetus to a fracturing of society, which this excess freedom creates. So that's going to be my rant on that. This is the word deliberate. To deliberate, it's this thorny thing that, although we in the West have always viewed liberty and freedom as really almost absolute positives, we've always had this word which sort of etymologically destroys that thing, but most people just don't understand. They don't actually, when they say the word deliberate, it's used infrequently enough that they don't break it down, and they don't realize that they're saying remove liberty, remove freedom, and yet they still view it as a positive. So I think that's sort of like a funny irony, in the land of the free, home of the brave, that nobody realizes that. So using that word deliberate as a springboard, again, this is not to say this is a silver bullet argument, he made an example with the word deliberate, let's impose fascism. I just, again, want to use it as a springboard, or to have you use it as a springboard, even with other people, to talk about when can we place impositions upon freedom and upon liberty. And I sort of want to attack the very notion of freedom and liberty, because, again, I just view them as, more often than not for most people, being a net negative. It is almost too much power afforded to ordinary man. Were we all gods, were we all perfect decision makers, a state of absolute anarchy would be unquestionably ideal. But we are so far from that. We are so imperfect that I think order needs to, if we want to live in a polite civil society, needs to be imposed. And again, I will be doing a fully fleshed out, fully scripted, long form sort of documentary style, a philosophical political essay on the nature of dictatorship and where I think it's going to crop up in America, and how, and what the various knock-on effects of that will be. But that will be in a month. I'm still working on that. But anyways, thank you for watching, and have a good day.